I'm going to put up my hand and acknowledge that clowning on Starfield in December of 2023 isn't exactly brave. Anyone can do it. We're all pretty much in agreement that this game is no good. However, even going back as early as August of this year, calling the game garbage, making that prediction, that was somewhat controversial. And today I want to talk about those people who put their integrity first and called Starfield for what it is, either before release or just when it came out. These were not people who shilled for the game. They didn't suck up to Microsoft. They weren't scared of fanboys getting out the pitchforks, burning down their homes, and they do deserve to get some praise for it. This reminds me also a bit of Cyberpunk before that came out, because there were so many reviewers, even when they got a review copy, they were actually able to play the title, they were still acting like it was God's gift, it was going to be the greatest game ever, the best RPG. I actually like Cyberpunk, and I even enjoyed it on PC when it released, but it was just so obvious that there were reviewers who were not honest. They were scared of all the hype, all these people acting like it was going to change their lives, it was going to cure their depression, and the reviewers were just not upfront. They said it was great when they deep down knew it wasn't. They didn't maintain their integrity. So let's look at some people who were honest about Starfield, and we'll begin with Mark Kern. Now, Mark Kern himself is a little bit of a controversial figure, but he is a game developer. He knows his stuff. He worked on classic World of Warcraft, the good era of that game. He hasn't had much success when he's returned to game development, but he was bang on about Starfield. He's very active on Twitter. He makes his opinion heard pretty often. And back in August, so August 2023, he had this to say about Starfield. The start screen of a game can reveal a lot about how rushed the team was and how much pride they took in their work. Starfield's start screen either shows hasty shipping deadlines by a passionate team overworked, or a team that did not care. And if we look at the Starfield start screen, I hadn't thought about it for a while, but it may be the literal worst start screen I've ever seen in a video game. Maybe there's just some super unmemorable ones I've forgotten, but if you look at it, it's so bland. And I don't even think it's just the screen itself. It's because Starfield fundamentally lacks any real art direction. It is so bland. Despite all of that, the reaction at the time wasn't really to agree that this sucks. It was that people were being pedantic. Who cares about the start screen? Let's just focus on the overall title, the overall product. And that was fair back in August, but obviously the game comes out, it is lazy, it is a mess. So people now start to look for the clues. What were the red flags that could have warned us? And I think this genuinely is one of them. We can even see the tweet itself. It had 10 million plus views, but it was ratioed, which basically means it had more comments than it had likes, suggesting that it was a controversial post. A lot of people didn't agree with Mark, or Grums as he calls himself on Twitter, and some of the arguments against him were things like, I disagree in this case because Bethesda start screens are always bland. This fits the Skyrim Fallout 4 style completely. Now, I will argue with Fallout, you've still got the power armor, for instance, which is just very distinct to Fallout. You see it, you know you are getting into a Fallout game. And Skyrim, yeah, the start screen probably isn't great either. But if you see the Skyrim logo, just the logo itself, not even the writing of the Elder Scrolls Skyrim, you recognize the game immediately. Whereas Starfield, if you took away the Starfield writing itself, you just have a circle that is meant to resemble a planet. If you look at what's around the logo as well, this planet in the background, if you didn't already know you were playing a space game, this would just look lazy. It doesn't really look like anything. Again, no art direction put into it, and that extends to the writing, the font. That just sucks. Even in-game, the UI and all of that, it just doesn't really grip you. And if we go back to Mark's point here, he doesn't even really disagree that it's any worse than better than the Fallout or Skyrim start screens. He just says that he recalls that they were passionate teams who worked on the Fallouts and so on, that also shipped fast and buggy games. All he's really saying is that the start screen being bland suggests that they really had to rush that at the last minute. They didn't have a lot of time on it. And that is actually true about Starfield, because over the years we've learnt that that game, it didn't start development full force after Fallout 4. It only really started after Fallout 76. They were all hands on deck for that turd, and that meant that their next single-player title probably only got 3 or 4 years in development. And it also meant that when they came up with the terrible idea of having hundreds of planets, that there was no way to course correct because they were locked into that development. They had to rush the game out. They only worked on it for 3 or 4 years, which is actually short for modern AAA development. And there were so many people disagreeing with Mark. For instance, this comment: "I don't care, it's a start screen, it's meant to be straightforward and to the point. Core functionality, menus, and art, that's it. Same from my experience with Skyrim and Fallout. No red flags or concerns have popped up on my radar at all with Starfield. I don't know why the beef exists." Well, that aged like milk, and I bet you this is someone who probably hates Starfield now, and they've totally forgotten that they were talking like this. You have someone else here, and he's tagged in Pete Hines here, who probably left Bethesda because of how bad Starfield was, and he saw the writing on the wall. But this person says, "Hey, Pete Hines, next time you and the lovely folks over at Bethesda, instead of rushing to make a game with many systems, factions, choices, and ways to play, I would urge you to only focus on the title screen, so you guys won't appear to be hasty or simply don't care." And then the game turned out to be absolutely deplorable, and this person is in shambles. If we see where Mark is today on this, because I was curious if he'd followed up, now that the game has a overwhelmingly negative reception, if he's commented on it, and he kind of has. So we've got his original post here on the left referring to the start screens, and here he is commenting on the mostly negative reviews on Steam, where he kind of says, "I told you so, don't knock start screen analysis, it just works." Now, to play devil's advocate, none of this really means that Mark wasn't being pedantic about the start screens. I'm sure there's plenty of examples of other non-Bethesda titles that have boring start screens but are bangers. They're good games. But I think it was more about people just blatantly arguing with him, being really upset that he was suggesting Starfield would be no good. There were many people, and I count myself among these people to some extent, those who just wanted Starfield to be good. We thought it was going to be, at the very least, a great exploration game. It would take us back to the Bethesda Fallouts, the Skyrims, and at least be a fun time. I even upgraded my computer for this piece of shit. What an investment that was. But I was someone who did ignore some of the red flags and thought, no, I'm sure they're not going to drop the ball massively. So the lesson really is to be skeptical. Don't trust what developers are telling you about how great something is going to be. Use your eyes. Look at the footage they're showing you. Look at what you can actually see and make your predictions from there. Wait for the user reviews. Wait for the feedback to come in. Don't just get blindly hyped and start arguing with people who suggest it might not be the greatest thing ever. It doesn't mean you can't be excited about a game, but you should put things in perspective, especially if the studio's last game sucks like Fallout 76. That really should have been the writing on the wall. And I'm not just going to talk about this Mark Kern guy today, but I did also want to mention that back then he wasn't just criticizing the start screen. He was also talking about the fundamentals of the game. He predicted, and this is August 17, this is even before the start screen stuff, he said, "My prediction, Starfield is going to be slammed so hard, it's built for a standard before Baldur's Gate smashed that standard, it's bad timing. If it has any AAA-style unplayable bugs, it's going to get roasted." Well, that wasn't really it. It was just the fundamental game was rubbish. It wasn't even the bugs. And he says, "I hope I am pleasantly wrong." Well, he wasn't. Most of what he said was correct. In a post-Baldur's Gate 3 world, people were not having Starfield. And I do think it's also why people have gone back to games like Oblivion, Skyrim, Fallout 3, 4, and have started to criticize them more heavily than they did in the past. It's not purely revising history. It's because a lot of people playing on console, they didn't always have access to great role-playing games, or they weren't heavily marketed to them, unless it was something like Dragon Age Origins, Mass Effect. Something like a Skyrim was really all you got. For me personally, I didn't actually grow up with CRPGs. I was introduced to Divinity Original Sin 1 when it came out, and when I jumped into it, I was just so blown away at an in-depth role-playing game that I felt we weren't really getting in the AAA space. It made me go back. It made me go and play the original Fallout CRPGs 1 and 2, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, so many titles, Arcanum, and that just made me realize, hey, the AAA gaming experience, it's so dumbed down. And Baldur's Gate 3 has done the same thing on a wider scale. It's not some innovative title that has totally changed RPGs, it's just an extremely competent CRPG that's introduced so many people to the genre, and it's absolutely made people see Starfield for the sham that it is. Mark Kern was totally right here. Now, I can't believe I'm saying this, but IGN got this spot on as well. They were not scared of Bethesda fans coming to get them. Oh, you can't criticize Todd the God, you just can't do it. They were really, really honest, and everything they said was pretty much right. This was the verdict of the review, and they gave it a 7 out of 10, which is pretty brave given this industry. Often you don't see anything that's genuinely not a dud fall below like an 8. I mean, how many times does Call of Duty, they release a lazy campaign, it still gets good scores? Maybe not this year, finally things are changing, but it has happened in the past, and Bethesda games have normally got good scores, so I like to see this. And do remember that Starfield has a pretty good Metacritic score. Most reviewers were giving it 8s, 9s, some were even giving it 10s, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. But IGN on Starfield said, it's never a great sign when someone recommends a game on the grounds that it gets good after more than a dozen hours. That's not even true. That seemed to be dodgy marketing from Bethesda, where they pretended, oh, the game gets better if you keep on playing it. Don't judge it now, to trick people to get their metrics up, maybe, on the playtime. I don't even know what that was about, because early on, at least for me, I thought, yeah, this is boring, but maybe it gets better. People keep talking about it getting better. It just felt like sunk cost fallacy, where you thought, oh, well, I've already put 40 hours in. If it is going to get better, I might as well keep going. Surely the next planet, the next quest, it's all going to take off. But it doesn't. And IGN go on to say, but that's very much the kind of game Starfield is, and I do recommend it. Maybe this reviewer wasn't quite right. I think they get it right with everything else, so we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. There are a lot of forces working against it, and the combination of disjointed space travel, non-existent maps, aggravating inventory management, and a slow rollout of essential abilities very nearly did it in. Well, that was part of the puzzle. Then you've got the space travel, the procedural generation. If this didn't do in, that all absolutely did. And the comments, people were absolutely furious with IGN. And I've got to say, I like the direction they've gone in more recently, where they aren't just sucking up to the game publishers. They are trying to focus on the consumers, the customers. I know IGN's never going to be perfect, but at least they're going in the right direction. They're not just a Kotaku or a Polygon who everyone absolutely hates. And if we go into the comments, here is someone who felt informed by this 7 out of 10 review, and there's certainly some angry people under this. So all of these quotes are complete turn-offs for me and reason enough to skip the game entirely. For instance, in Starfield, you can't go anywhere without fast traveling. And this person is not happy. They say, so then don't play it. Pretty pathetic that you'll skip a game you were interested in because you can't jump right into the action. And because a streamer said so. This is an IGN review. What are you talking about? You're definitely not a true gamer. Never will be either. Wow, you enjoy Starfield. You're a true gamer, man. I want to be like you. And it doesn't stop there, because you've got someone who has Starfield as their display photo. That says a lot. And this person says, since no one has brought it up yet, I'd like to point out that it's sitting at an 88 out of 100 on Metacritic, which is a really good score for a video game. Yeah, it absolutely is, and this game does not deserve it. It has that score for a few reasons. Microsoft curated the reviews. They didn't just hand them out to anyone. I think they knew deep down that this game was going to be a dud, and they were a little bit scared. They'd already had fails with Redfall earlier in the year, and they were determined for this to work out. out. They spent billions to acquire Bethesda, supposedly for games like this, and now it was going to disappoint. So they were selective with who they gave the reviews to, and that is in combination with so many reviewers just being scared to give a highly anticipated game a bad score. A lot of these reviewers, I think they jump into it. They don't really understand games. They're more writers. They probably wish they could be a genuine journalist, and now they're stuck writing for video games. They don't really care about video games for the most part, so a lot of them just get into their review and then they look over the fence. They look at what other reviewers are saying and they just copy. That seems to be the industry, and that's how we wind up with a game like Starfield getting a pretty good Metacritic score, because no one's being genuinely honest except a few people. So I give IGN some credit here. They rarely get it right, but I think recently they've been alright. With this review, I think they made a video about Baldur's Gate 3 and how it should set a new standard. We shouldn't listen to idiot game devs who say, oh, you're entitled if you want a good RPG. Get the fuck out of here. And just to look at the other side of this is Destructoid, who gave Starfield a 10 out of 10. This is the perfect example of a reviewer just not being honest. Starfield was expected to be the new, huge Bethesda title, and therefore let's just mindlessly give it a 10, because I'm sure many of the other outlets are going to do it, which they did. There were a few 10 out of 10s out there, but I'll say months after release, not even the most brain-dead Starfield fanboys would agree with this. Most of them, they'll probably say, oh, it's a great game, but they'll acknowledge it's not perfect, whereas this reviewer seems to think it's flawless, which is very odd to me. Because if you look at the verdict of this review, they bang on about everything, the graphics, the combat, blah, blah, blah. But the TLDR of the review is this. Even though this is Bethesda's biggest game yet, it may also be its least buggy. Sure, there are some trademark silly Bethesda bugs, like characters loading in bald or NPCs getting stuck walking into a chair. After 100 hours, I never encountered anything game-breaking. And this is probably the best thing he had to say, according to this reviewer, because it was their least buggy game, which is still a low bar. It had bugs, just not as many as previous games, and yet they give it a perfect score. When they talk about the rest of the game, it's pretty much just flaws. There are definitely some things I feel could enhance the Starfield experience even further. Even though you can land right next to mission objectives and points of interest on a planet, it would have been nice to have access to some sort of planetary vehicles, or even rideable creatures to get around a bit easier. I also think it would have been a great touch to be able to actually fly your ship down onto a planet, or fly around in a planet's atmosphere as opposed to only landing and lifting off. He's basically just talking about things that were no good in the game, which should be fine if it was like a 7, an 8 out of 10, but you're giving it a perfect score. You're suggesting it's either flawless or the strengths of the game were just so strong it bypasses all of this, but you don't mention any of that strengths. Where is this even coming from? And then to wrap this up, he mentions, I wasn't sure if it could be done, but Bethesda has managed to raise the bar for sandbox games even higher. Although he's not going to mention what any of this bar raising actually is. Oh no, it's Bethesda. They're perfect. Todd is a visionary. 10 out of 10, case closed. Fortunately, even 4 months ago, before this game came out, people weren't buying it. A 10? Doubt. It is definitely not a 10. Seems like a solid 7 to me. Skyrim was a 10. Fallout 4 was an 8. It was too repetitive and bland. I think some of these reviews are paid promo. Again, totally spot on, and this person is predicting it before the game released. I think the lesson absolutely is that no matter what the title is, if it's mainstream, there's going to be a defense force. There's going to be fanboys of the title who won't accept anyone criticizing it, and then you'll have the media utterly praising it. And the thing about the media is they'll always have no integrity. They'll praise it when the money's coming in, the publisher is either enticing them or even bribing them, who knows what goes on. But once public sentiment absolutely shifts, they'll start shitting on it as well, and they'll pretend that they never praised it. What are you talking about, they'll say. So whatever the next game is, the next potential Starfield that people are getting excited about, if you are pumped, if you are hyped, I know at least for myself, I'm going to try and take a step back, not get overexcited, because we've seen what happens when we get disappointed. I think Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2, that is going to be one for me, because that game is going to be a disaster, possibly worse than this. It's nice to see that not everyone was fooled. Hopefully that is the case for the next big game. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.